Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, it's Jory Rose. I hope you're staying healthy, staying safe, and staying sane during our shelter in place as we're all home. To help support you through this journey that we are all on, I wanted to remind you that in my Journey Forward Facebook group, which you can go to the show notes to access the link, I am doing meditations 6 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday mornings at 8:45 a.m., Wednesdays and Sundays at 12:30. The Wednesday and Sundays are going to be longer, about 20 to 30 minutes, whereas the weekday mornings are about 5-minute meditations. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday evenings, and Friday evenings at 6 p.m. I'm going to be doing mindfulness tools in relation to how we can all cope and survive, and not just survive, but really grow during this time. And on Saturdays at 11 a.m., I will be doing a live Q&A. So please, anything I can be in support with you around, any tools coming from a mindset of mindfulness, meditation, mindset itself, therapy, all of this is where I can come in to really be a resource and support to you. So I hope that you find these extra resources valuable to you. And if anybody you know would appreciate joining in as well and joining our community, please invite them into the group. Again, those links are in the show notes. All right, be well and enjoy today's episode. Hi, and welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. It is so timely, and I'm looking forward to this conversation today with my guest, Mike Robbins. Mike, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us today.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me, Jory. I'm happy to be here with you and everybody who's listening.
Yeah, so we crossed paths years ago at a wisdom conference, and I know I've been following your work since, and you are, among other things, an author, and I think your book titles just easily say it all. So, I'm excited to talk with you further, and you have a new book coming out called We're All in This Together. And I think right now, more than ever, and we were just saying offline, like, we didn't know when this book was coming out, you were going to, be launching in the midst of a global pandemic. So, before we jump in, I'm excited to have you on. And so introduce who you are, what you do, and tell us about your journey of how you got here to be writing these ubiquitous book titles.
Right. Well, thank you. This book, it's my 5th book. And it really is kind of a culmination in a lot of ways of all of my work. Although, again, when I was writing it last summer, I didn't think it would be coming out at this time. Jory, so I grew up here in the Bay Area where you and I live, and I grew up in Oakland. I was a baseball player all growing up as a kid and was pretty good at it. I actually got drafted out of high school by the New York Yankees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I didn't end up signing with the Yankees because I got a chance to play baseball in college at Stanford. So I go there. Then I get drafted out of Stanford.
That's a big choice right there.
It was a pretty big choice. Education was important in my family. Yeah. I got a chance to go to Stanford and play baseball, which happens to be a great school and a great baseball program. So from a practical standpoint, signing with the Yankees, I wanted to play in the major leagues ultimately, but going to Stanford was definitely continuing on my baseball journey and also getting my degree at the same time. I ended up getting drafted again out of college by the Kansas City Royals, and I did sign a pro contract. And, the way it works in baseball, you got to go into the minor leagues, even when you get drafted by a major league team. And I'm in the minor leagues trying to work my way up to the major leagues. Unfortunately, I was a pitcher and I tore ligaments in my elbow, blew my arm out. 3 surgeries later, was finally forced to retire, right? So, talk about being stuck and having to figure out what's my journey forward from here. Because I started baseball at 7, I got hurt at 23, and then retired at 25 and was like, oh, what do I do now? Right.
And though everyone has a different piece of that, I can't tell you how many people I work with who have lived their trajectory with a certain identity. Mm-hmm. And when it doesn't come through, whether it's through divorce or health or relocation, it's like, who am I now?
Right. And I absolutely. And I think, for me, growing up, single mom in Oakland. We didn't have a lot of money. I mean, my childhood for the most part was all right. I mean, it wasn't filled with, but there was definitely, my father had bipolar disorder, wasn't really around. There were a lot of challenging aspects of my life that I don't think I fully understood and appreciated as a kid and as an adolescent. I just was kind of make my way through it. But I definitely had this notion of like, I'm going to make it to the big leagues. I'm going to make some money. I'm going to be important. I'm going to fulfill this childhood dream. And it's going to everything's going to work out from there. I was sort of living this, what I was hoping would be a fairy tale at the end of it. And
happily ever baseball after.
Right. Take care of my mom, buy her a house, right off into the sunset as the hero of the story. And of course it didn't happen that way. And I think because it had been kind of this saving grace for me, this place, I really enjoyed baseball, but there was also a part of it, like my ego really liked that I was really good at this thing and I got a lot of attention for it. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of this thing that made me special and different and unique and elite in a way. That I wouldn't have said those words. But then all of a sudden it's like, now I'm this 25-year-old guy who never really thought about having a career of any kind besides sports. And even though I went to school, into a pretty good school, I'm like, what skills do I have? What the hell can I do in the real world? Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I got a job. It was the late 90s. I got a job in sort of during the internet, .com boom here in the Silicon Valley Bay Area, right? And I didn't know what I was doing. I'm in sales. A bunch of young people like me at the time were making money. And I'm like, I don't really know. But what I got really interested in outside of work, and it was more from my own personal growth and development. I'd actually suffered from depression when I was in college in a pretty significant way and knew quite a bit about mental illness from my father's bipolar. But what happened for me is I was still grappling with some of that and now having this major identity crisis and who am I? I got really into not only seeing a great therapist who was helping me a lot, but taking a lot of workshops and seminars and trying to figure myself out. And it was that work. It's actually where I met my wife, Michelle, 20 years ago. And I got really interested, I don't really love selling internet advertising, but I got to, make a living and pay the rent. But I really love all of this personal growth and development, and not just for my own growth, which I did, but I was like, I want to teach this. I want to, I would wander into bookstores and I would end up in the personal growth or self-help section or whatever they called it at the store at the time. And I was like, I was buying all these books by Wayne Dyer and Marianne Williamson and Deepak Chopra and Richard Carlson and Dan Millman. And I was like, I love all this stuff and I want to do this. This is what I want to do. I want to write books. I want to teach, but I had no sense of how you go about doing that. It was just it was like saying, I want to be an astronaut, quite frankly.
Right.
And
you can't do that by reading the books on what it's like to be an astronaut.
No, not exactly. And so what was interesting though is so I'm taking all these courses, I'm reading all these books, and then the universe intervenes and I get laid off in the summer of 2000 when the .com bubble burst. And
as the universe has a way of doing.
Right. Absolutely. And so now I'm like, oh, okay, well, and a mentor of mine asked me this question that was pretty basic, but profound. He said to me, Mike, if you could do anything and you don't have to worry about paying the rent and paying the bills and it was all handled, what would you do? And I was like, oh, well, I would write and I would speak and I would teach and I would coach and and he's like, oh, well, you seem really clear about that. You should do that. And I'm like, now? And he said, yeah. And I was like, well, I don't know how to do that now. And he's like, why not? And I said, well, because I'm 26 years old and I don't know anything and nobody knows who I am. And don't you have to have a degree or something to do that? And he was like, well, you could wait till you think you figured it out or you could just figure it out. And I was like, huh.
You're right. It's so simple and yet so profound. It's just do it.
Right. And I I'd met Michelle, my wife now at the time. We were just newly dating. She had actually gotten her master's in psychology, wanted to be a therapist, but didn't go through all the training and the hours and actually ended up starting her own staffing company, but was getting really into life coaching, which 20 years ago was now starting to be a thing that people were doing and getting trained in. And so together, she and I, and she really encouraged me, I decided I was going to start my business at the beginning of 2001. People told me, oh, go back to school, get a degree in psychology or get a degree in organizational development or get a degree in and I love learning.
Yeah.
I never loved school. So I was like, if I have to go back to school, I will. But if I don't have to, I'd really like to not have to.
Yeah.
But what I decided, Jory, you'll appreciate this because I know you've got a lot of education and it's important, right? But it's I decided to what I call design my own curriculum.
I love it.
I said this year of 2001, I'm going to start my business. The economy was really rough at the time, especially here in the Bay Area. All the tech companies were laying everybody off. And I said, I'm going to spend this year, I'm going to take whatever workshops I can. I'm going to read as many books as I can. I'm going to meet as many people. I'm going to listen to, in those days, I was still literally listening like cassette tapes on my Walkman. Yeah. I'm going to listen to as many of these things. And if I can learn enough and figure out how to get a business going where I'm coaching people and I'm speaking and I'm writing, great. If not, at the end of this year, I'll get a job. Like okay. I may be broke and I may be in debt, but if I went to school, I'd be broken in debt anyway. I'm just not going to end
up at the same place.
I'm not going to end up, the thing I won't have is a degree, but other than that, and so anyway, that was literally my plan starting, now going on almost 20 years ago. And my goal was just, can I do this so I don't have to go get a real job? And, it evolved over the years, but really my passion always was just getting in front of groups of people and sharing stories and ideas that I thought might resonate with them from my own experience, from what I was learning, from what I thought might be useful and relevant.
Yeah.
And it's just continued to evolve. Now, the interesting thing that happened in my business, just as we, long answer to your simple question of my journey, was I started to get hired by all these companies to come in and speak, which at first was kind of cool and interesting. And I'm like, well, great. But I didn't quite understand it because I was young. I had almost no business experience.
Yeah.
I was an athlete who worked for a couple of different internet companies. And I'm like, okay, sure, I'll go talk to this group at Wells Fargo or at Chevron. But like, why do they want to hear from me? What the hell do I know? But I found that a lot of my experience of what I learned about teamwork as an athlete related very much to the business world. And then what I was learning about personal growth and development, I just kind of had this ability, however this sounds, to like take what I think are sort of complex, really deep concepts and communicate them in a way that's not dumbing them down, but just in a way that's accessible to people. And it was like a lot of the people that were sitting in the audience at Chevron, let's just say, weren't going to necessarily come and spend the weekend or the whole week at the retreat at Esalen or wherever I was going. But I could come back and say, hey, here's what I learned. And here's how I think this might be relevant to you. And they'd be like, oh yeah, that'll help me communicate more effectively with my coworker or my spouse or something. And I was like, oh, maybe that's some kind of gift or talent that I have. And that's what I've really been doing for the last 20 years.
Oh, I think it's beautiful. I mean, to me, that sounds like the dream come true, right?
Well, and it's been really fun to just watch it grow and evolve. And now to the point where we are today, and like this 5th book that I just wrote, right? We're all in this together. Like the thing that I have noticed over my years of studying teams and group dynamics, and what I loved about when I was an athlete, I noticed this didn't always happen, actually didn't often happen, but when it did, when you could get a group of people, even with strong personalities and egos and ambition and all that stuff, somehow something would click. And the goal of what we were trying to create together became more important than our own individual egos and ambitions. And when that happened, it was so much fun and it was so easy to succeed. And it was just this like joyous communal experience that we were literally all in this thing together, rooting for each other's success. And when that sort of lightning in a bottle would happen when I was playing sports, it always turned into extraordinary success that was so much fun.
It's that magic that is, you can't touch it and feel it, but when it happens, it's there.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I've been, over the last 20 years in my work, trying to deconstruct in ways to make more accessible to people and to teams and to groups. It's like, how do we create that kind of environment where people can thrive? And it's not just about winning whatever game we're playing. Although, listen, I mean, I love to win versus lose, but it's more about how do we nurture ourselves? How do we grow? How do we connect with each other? And to your point, and to so much of what you do here on this podcast and in your work, how do we actually engage in the journey of what we're doing so that we can become more of who we are in the process, not simply just get to the end of the destination we're getting? Because look, life happens. And sometimes, while none of us were expecting a global pandemic, it happens and it literally knocks the whole world off its axis.
Culture. Yeah.
And we go,
it's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, one of the things you mentioned before we hit record was this idea of this spiritual bypass.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a phrase I love, but for those who don't know what it is, I would love for you to explain spiritual bypass and how it's so possible to do that right now.
Well, my understanding of spiritual bypass, when I used to hear it, it always would kind of freak me out. Like, is that some kind of a procedure? I don't know what that is, but but my understanding is basically what we do. And those of us, probably many people listening, we get on our path of growth, of development, of spirituality, of mindfulness, of awareness. Like, oh, I'm going to look at life in this deeper, which is beautiful, right? But then something bad happens, right? In our life personally, we go through a divorce or a health challenge, or something bad happens challenging happens in the world. And immediately we just go right to well, this is in the highest good. Well, this is going to work. There's always a silver lining. And while that's true, that's really deep personal and spiritual work to get to the place where we can see the value, the lesson, the blessing, even in the challenge. Sometimes if we're so quick to go there, it's a way that we don't actually allow ourselves to feel the grief or the sadness or the disappointment or the anger or the fear or whatever the real emotion is. So we bypass the hard feeling just to get to that higher ground, but it's inauthentic. We didn't really do the work to get through it to get there.
It's almost like talking the talk, but not walking the walk.
Yeah. Well,
so we're presenting like we're so spiritual and yet not allowing, I love how you named like the grief to be there, because, to truly be on that spiritual path is to allow for all of it equally.
Totally. And you know what? In my life, Jory, some of the most profound experiences, the most spiritual experiences have come through times of great pain and great loss. And when I've been talking about this recently with respect to kind of what's going on for all of us collectively. No, I've never had an experience like I don't think any of us have had going through anything quite like this. Probably the closest we've had collectively for those of us who are Americans was 9/11, although that was very different. And that was focused here in our country in a very specific way.
And that also felt very short. Like it was an acute fear. I mean, impacted, still at our airports, right? In our security. But I think the acute fear and stress was short.
Yeah. Well, I think looking back on it now, I think we collectively were scared for quite a while of being attacked again, or what does this mean? And but you're right, it happened. And then it was like, well, is it going to happen again? But it seemed as though, and as we got days and weeks and months away from it, it was this one-time event that maybe we had some collective PTSD that it might happen again, or when's the next attack going to happen? And thankfully, for the most part, at least here in our country, we haven't had that happen or something like that happen.
Knock on wood.
Knock on wood, right? But again, and I think right now we're in the midst of this pandemic, and so it's hard because we don't know where is this going, how's it going to play out, how long is it going to last, how long is the fear going to last, and so it's hard sometimes in the middle of something. But the thing on a personal level, what I can relate what's going on to right now, and it's very different, but it's similar, emotionally feels similar to me, is actually grief, like the loss of someone close, and having lost my father when I was 27, my mother when I was 37, and my older sister Lori died back in 2016, and a few other really painful losses in my life. Well, those experiences, and anybody listening who's dealt with or maybe dealing with right now with grief and loss, incredibly painful, incredibly challenging, and unbelievably growth-inducing and beautiful from my experience of them.
So I don't know if you've seen, but there has been an article, and perhaps I'll even see if I can get it into the show notes floating around, from the Harvard Business Review, that naming exactly what you just said, that's, in relation to the pandemic right now, that the emotion people are feeling is grief.
Yes. Someone told me about it. I think it's they're talking about the different stages of grief with respect to what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And so from what I understand from reading it, it was the guy who wrote the book.
With Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, right? Yes, that's what I haven't read it. I got to read the piece. Yeah.
So there's the 5 stages of grief, and the last one is acceptance. And he, with the permission of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's family, because he wanted to have honor and integrity in the work that they did and what she did, but he goes, I need to add on because there's something missing, and the missing piece is meaning.
Right.
So how do we make meaning from this grief we're experiencing?
Yeah.
And to me, this is so, what I find it really fascinating on this universal, global, common humanity level.
Yeah.
So for me, it's about the universe calling us all to say, hey guys, something hasn't been working and I'm going to shake it all up, because if we don't do something now, the consequences are even bigger than what this pandemic is going to produce.
Clearly.
And so for me, the way that my mind works is it's this rise to heed the call.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's the universe saying, "Hey guys, it's time to practice mindfulness."
Yeah.
We got to slow down. We got to be still.
Mm-hmm.
We have to put a pause on our trajectory of, achievement and chasing and glorification of busyness and disconnection of family and disconnection of self and hedonic treadmill and, defenses against emotions, all of it, to say, like, let's reset, let's reflect.
Yeah.
And let's come back renewed and stronger.
Absolutely. Well, and I love that you shared all that, because I can relate. And I think collectively we're in this experience. Again, look, we all deal with things differently. This as a therapist, that not everybody responds to the same trauma or the same stimulus in the same way. And what I've learned through my own experience with grief, like when my sister died, I remember very vividly, and this wasn't the first time I'd experienced that feeling or that sense, but when someone close to us dies, and my sister had been sick, she had cancer, and it went on for almost 4 years, and it was pretty brutal. And there was a sense of mercy and even gratitude when she finally passed, that okay, she's not suffering. And at the same time, there's just still this, how is it possible that my big sister, who was growing up the way we grew up, was my person, was as much or more even than my mother. I counted on my sister Lori to be my North Star. That she taught me so many things about life, about relationships, about how to be in the world. And with both my parents and my sister gone, I was, I think, 41, about to turn 42 years old. I remember feeling for a number of months, if not for a couple of years, almost like people say, how's it feel? And I said, well, I feel like I don't know where I am in space. Like I'm disoriented.
Ungrounded.
Ungrounded. Yeah. I'm the only living member of my nuclear family. Now, at the same time, also, honestly, there was a part of it, and I mean this with love and respect to my family, that also felt really liberating, because now there were no stories. There were sadly, no stories to tell that I could remember, but also I wasn't in a box of, I'm her brother, I'm their son. So again, but the experience of grief from my perspective over the years, as I've gone through it different times, is it puts everything in perspective. The world gets very quiet and focused on what matters and who matters. And most of the BS of life kind of goes away. It's like, look, I'm just dealing with about the most significant thing you can deal with as a human being. I don't really care that you're annoyed with me that I didn't respond to your email as fast as you wanted me to, or whatever, or that I can't find a parking place, or I'm feeling like I really want to lose 10 pounds or whatever. And those things that would be really significant and annoying and stressful and frustrating on just the daily basis of life become like, really? Am I really going to waste my time and energy worrying about that? And in a way, while we're still in the midst of this thing, and it's hard again to see the forest for the trees, there's definitely an element of, whoa, this is reoriented our perspective. My 14-year-old Samantha said to me the other day in the kitchen, hey, Dad, what's going to be really cool when this is all over? And I said, what? She goes, we're going to appreciate a whole bunch of stuff we weren't appreciating before.
Yeah.
And I said, you're right, honey, we are.
And I've got daughters the same age. Mine are 14 and 16. And I think for that generation to have that perspective is huge.
Right. Well, and think of, again, the challenge, and having teenagers, it's not easy. We've got a 14, 11-year-old, and they're going a little stir crazy. They understand what's happening. I'm actually been pleasantly surprised with how they've been responding, and they have their moments, as we all do, of sort of melting down about this. And I want to see my friends and what's going on. And this is crazy. And, all of that. But I also wonder, and not to do a spiritual bypass on it and just assume it's all going to be good, but I wonder, and I'm curious of what the impact's going to be on all of these young people going through this experience, and on all of us. Because again, like anything, this is going to change us. The question becomes, how does it change us? Do we use this in a real, genuine, authentic way to deepen our practice, mindfulness and other practices, to deepen our experience, to deepen our appreciation, our awareness, our compassion? Or do we use it as an excuse, right, for why things didn't turn out? I mean, that's one thing I've been giving a lot of people around me permission, it's okay to feel disappointed right now. I was listening to Brene Brown's podcast recently, and she said this great thing about being careful about not getting into comparative suffering. So what we do is we go through something like, we're all dealing with this in different ways. But if you're a high school senior and you're disappointed that you're missing your prom and your graduation, that's a real thing when you're 17, 18 years old. Like that's a real sad, disappointing thing. Now, is that as bad or as significant as like dying of the coronavirus? Clearly not. But get into that comparative, well, you should just be grateful because you have a house to live in. And, when we start lecturing our children or even ourselves, that can be problematic.
Yeah. One of the things that I always talk about is there's no hierarchy to suffering.
Right.
Which for me has always been a really interesting challenge because, as the root of, Buddhist practice is to alleviate suffering.
Right.
And if we start comparing suffering, because when I hear the word suffering, and I've said this so many times before, when I hear the word suffering, I think of the Holocaust.
Right.
Like that's true suffering.
Yeah.
And, last summer, my daughter got bat mitzvahed in Israel and we traveled in Europe afterwards and we were at the Anne Frank house. Mm. So, this quarantining after literally less than a year ago, having been in the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam and walking up those stairs and in those rooms and seeing the one window, we're all fine.
Right.
If compare against that.
Yeah.
then we're never going to allow ourselves to truly feel what we're really feeling.
Right.
And so I always say to people, if it's your suffering, then own it.
Yeah.
Allow it. We don't need to overly constantly be forgiving for what we're feeling because,
totally.
If I compare my bad day to someone else's bad day and they're like, oh, you don't have it bad, it dismisses my emotions.
Right. Well,
so
and I think both
a way of, getting out of that spiritual bypass is to say yes and.
Absolutely.
It's okay for our suffering to look different.
Totally. And I think both can be true simultaneously, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the tricky part. Can I simultaneously honor and acknowledge my own stress, my own challenge, my own experience of whatever's happening right now or in general, and at the same time have some perspective? I had a friend of mine, Lisa McLeod, was on my podcast a few days ago, and we were having this conversation, and she was saying, there's that story, I think it's from the Bible, the whole, when I complained about having no shoes, I saw someone with no feet. Right. And she said, but that runs us into a trap because the truth is, you can have some perspective. Well, that person has no feet and I'm complaining about having no shoes. But if you still don't have any shoes, that's a problem in and of itself that's painful. Right. And it may not be as bad if we compare it to what the problem looks like over there with the person with no feet. But again, I think both can be true, that I can go, wow, I'm disappointed or I'm feeling scared. I've been going through my own journey of, like everyone, this has impacted my life and my business and my livelihood and how we do things. And I have a new book coming out and I had all these events that were scheduled that got canceled and rescheduled. And oh my God, right. And when we got the kids at home and they're trying to do online school and all the things that are going on. And then I turn on the news and I see people who are dying and I see people who are caring for those who are dying or putting themselves at risk. And I have an enormous amount of gratitude and appreciation for what they're doing. And I got to be careful to not turn it into shame for myself. Like, what am I doing? And I'm over here whining about this. I should be showing up and helping more, giving more, doing something. It's like, well, okay, hold on a second. Like, let's come back to being real with ourselves. Yeah. How are you actually feeling and what's really true? And then honor that experience and then choose what's the next right action for me to take. Yeah. Sometimes right now, the next right action for me to take is to sit down on the couch and watch Netflix with my family. Like that's the next right act. Sometimes it's to sit down and to meditate. Sometimes it's to go exercise. Sometimes it's to try to be of service to someone or to write something or create something and put something out in the world that I think might help people. Like, I don't know. We're all kind of making this up as we go.
We are. And we're all in this together. Right. And it's true. And I think there's some really deep beauty in that we all have an understanding. If we look at Kristen Neff's definition of self-compassion, and one of the key components is common humanity.
Yep.
There is nobody that can't share in this common humanity of our experience. While like what we're saying is they're different.
Right.
And they're the same. The levels and degrees are going to shift. But I can't think of anything. And perhaps maybe a world war, but even then there were countries that weren't involved. So, not in our lifetime, but outside of 9/11, like you said, where that common humanity has, I believe, and this isn't the spiritual bypass, I truly believe it's going to shift our humanity. It has to.
I think so. Well, and I do think, and I love Kristen and her work on self-compassion is so important Because one of the things, look, one of the reasons why I started down my own path of growth and discovery that I was talking about earlier came from some of my own pain and my own confusion. And I remember, Jory, being in college. So here I am, I'm this, even with some of the challenges I grew up with and overcoming some of that, I'm at Stanford, I'm playing baseball, I'm like doing all the things I think I'm supposed to do, right? I'd been pretty good in school. I'd been pretty good in sports. I was like, I had friends. I had a girlfriend. It's like, I was checking all the boxes of here's what you're supposed to do to be happy, to be successful. And I was miserable, like suicidally depressed, miserable. And this is 1995. Again, I was very familiar with depression, with mental illness from, my father's struggle with bipolar disorder, as well as a ton of mental illness in my family. But, 25 years ago, people were talking about it more in 95 than they were, say, probably 20 years before that. And like when my father was in college and first figured out that he had some mental illness, like they literally sent him to a mental institution, gave him tranquilizers and electroshock therapy, right? Like that was how he was treated in those days, and thought of it was like this big sort of deep, dark secret in the family. And like people didn't talk about it. But in 95, I still didn't know much about it. And I thought like something's really wrong with me. I'm really scared. And I went to the Student Health Center and found a fantastic therapist there who was able to help me initially. But I remember thinking to myself, okay, without being arrogant about this, like I'm sort of on the surface kind of winning the game that we've all been playing here as a 20-year-old young man in the world, in school, in sports, and right? Like there was nowhere else on the planet I wanted to be in terms of accomplishing. And I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, so I'm oriented around performance and achievement. So I was achieving all these things. And I'm like, if I'm miserable like this, first of all, I was pissed off because I was like, the rules of this game suck because I'm winning and I feel like I'm losing. And second of all, I immediately was like, oh my God, so many other people must be suffering like this and no one's talking about it.
Because it looks good on the surface. It looks good from the outside in.
Right. And I was always, even like when I was much younger, I was always the kid that was like in class thinking to myself, I didn't actually raise my hand and say this, but I wanted to raise my hand and go, why the hell are we learning this? Like, I don't understand how, first of all, I'm ever going to use this. And second of all, how does this relate to my life? Like, how about all these feelings I have going on inside of me that I don't understand and like take over all the time and make me think I'm crazy, but like nobody else was really talking about it. And again, I think, thankfully, we're doing a little bit of a better job parenting, not that we don't have our issues. I think we're doing a better job with education and how we think about this with both children and adolescents and with ourselves. But I also feel like, back to your conversation or mention of Kristen Neff's work in Common Humanity, so much of what I'm so passionate about in my work and in life is finding like, where are those places of common ground that we have as human beings? Because there's so many, even while respecting our differences. Are men and women different? Of course. Are people of certain ages or backgrounds or races or religions? Huge differences that we got to constantly pay more attention to and be aware of. And simultaneously, down below the waterline on the iceberg, so to speak, we get way more similar to one another when we get down there. And that's why what's happening right now collectively, as scary and unsettling and uncertain as it is, it's getting us down to some of those core human visceral experiences and emotions that I think is actually, to your point, bonding us with each other. Although ironically, we're all separated physically from each other right now.
Yeah. And, which is why I hate the phrase social distancing, because it really should just be physical distancing, because I think we're actually getting more social by default, because we have to connect. It's going to be really interesting. And I feel like, at least in my profession, I think I will have a long-term job security.
Yes, there's lots of need for what you have to do.
Mental and emotional health is going to take a long time to get through this. And as a quick aside, I recently heard some of the interesting things that are going to come out of this is clearly where there's going to be PTSD. There's going to be an increase in hypochondria. And there's going to be an increase in agoraphobia. And this is something I've had people contact me about, is what happens when I'm able to and I don't want to go out again.
I don't want to. I know.
So there's like these really interesting phenomena that's going to occur. But I want to go back just 1 second. I think those who've been inclined, and I'd love to hear your input on this, because this is just what I'm noticing and what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing. Those who were ever inclined towards any sort of spiritual or faith-based path are going to deepen.
Yeah.
And yet there are many who have been running on the hedonic treadmill with their defenses and their vices and their projections and their externalizations. And it's going to be really interesting to see how people who have succeeded at not being present and acknowledging what is, when they can no longer stop at the bar,
right,
go to the gym, take the yoga class, go out with their friends, go to the concert, get on a plane for work or business, because I know people who feel trapped because they can't travel for work anymore.
Right.
And now they're home with their partners, where all these things that seemed collectively acceptable of ways of not being present are taken away.
Yeah.
That's going to be a really interesting now what, because this is where I'm not sure how much the common humanity is going to be an accessible mindset for someone who's been trying to stay disconnected.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, look, one of the many things that's happening in this experience is it's forcing us to come face to face with ourselves, with our partners, if we have them, with our children, with our families, in ways it's like, oh,
yeah,
I was running around. And sometimes we complain about being so busy. I'm so busy. I'm so busy. And then everything slows down, or a lot of these options are taken away, these pathways. And we have to just kind of, oh, I got to face myself. And, you know, another experience I've had in my life that's, again, different, but reminds me of this is actually in my sports career. There were a couple times before my big injury that ultimately ended my career. I got injured a few times where I had to stop playing for a period of time, which as an athlete is like the worst thing, right? You get hurt and it's painful, but it's like, I can't play.
Yeah.
And in those experiences, I had to learn. I wasn't, and still patience is not my greatest quality. I wasn't a real patient kid. And to sit on the sidelines and have to wait and then rehab the injury and then go through all of the mental, emotional stuff around that. How do I get through this injury and deal with the time and the patience? And then am I going to feel safe enough when I go back out to play again that I'm not going to get hurt? And the further along I got in the competition, the harder it was. Like, this sport is hard enough to do when I'm fully healthy, let alone now I may not be fully healthy. So, but some aspect of having to then come back to, oh, I can't do this thing to keep myself engaged and at times distracted. I have to actually focus on me. And those moments.
A lot of people don't want to do that.
No.
And that's scary as shit for a lot of people.
It
holding
is.
that mirror up and having a look at it.
Right. Well, I think I can't remember who said it, or it's some Buddhist saying or something, is like the scariest thing for most humans to do is to sit in a room alone with themselves.
There's been an experiment about that people were given the option to sit by themselves in a room or give themselves, like, I think it was like an electric shock. And the surprisingly number of people who chose to give themselves a shock versus stay alone in a room was exorbitantly high.
Well, and it's like anybody who's ever been on a silent retreat of any kind, whether it's a day or a weekend or a week or a couple weeks, or, you know, and I've done them in very short spurts myself.
What's the longest you've done for that?
I think just like a 2 or 3 day. I've never done a whole week or, you know, friends of mine who do 10, 20 days. Like, it blows my mind.
I did a 5-day once.
Okay.
And that felt really long. But I will say, I actually wish it had been longer, because as soon as I got into the groove of it, it was done.
Right.
And I actually, it's funny you say that, because, and we'll get back to what you were going to say, but I feel like we're on the same ride that my silent retreat took me on. Yeah. Where the first day I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is like a vacation. No one's talking to me. I don't have to talk to anyone else. Like,
right.
Bliss.
Yes.
Quiet, it's still. And then the second day was like, oh my God, holy shit, what am I doing here? How did I get here? Like, why did I sign up for any of this? The third day was, okay, now I need help. Yeah. The fourth day was, okay, I'm starting to figure this out. And I'm adjusting. And then the fifth day it was over. So it was like, just as I got into the pattern of being with myself and my thoughts and my emotions and the stillness, it was done. And I feel like we're on this similar ride of, the first couple of days might have felt like, staycation, beautiful, sleeping in, I can be in my pajamas, don't have to do my hair and makeup, wear a bra, get dressed, whatever. And then it's that wave of like, holy shit, now what? Okay, then we're going to get some new tools. And I think once we all kind of get it figured out, the world is going to open its doors again. And we're going to be like, okay, but now what?
Right. Well, and it is going to be interesting to your point you were making earlier. I've been thinking about, how I and how we are all going to respond when things do open back up to whatever degree, and I'm somebody, again, for what it's like, I'm sort of whatever the opposite of a germaphobe would be, to the point where Michelle's like, wash your hands. That's gross. Do you know what I mean? Or like, clean yourself. Again, I'm not thinking, I'm not someone, knock on wood, I'm not someone who gets sick that often. I travel a lot. I'm not like overly paranoid. I'm not constantly, I will probably have changed some of my personal washing my hands and being mindful of that more in a hopefully healthy, not paranoid way. But the interesting thing will be just, again, like, I'm an extrovert. I love being around people. I'm up on stage in front of people. I'm out in the world shaking people's hands and hugging people and doing all, like, I'm missing that a lot and looking forward to doing that. And I'm aware of the fact that it's going to probably be scary at first to do some of that and to feel my way through it and then interact with the world in such a way. Like, when I go out in the world right now, I don't know how it is for you, but just going to the grocery store, which is all I've really been doing besides walking around the neighborhood for the last, 3 weeks, it's super uncomfortable. I don't like it. It's so
emotionally draining, isn't it?
It is, because I'm feeling simultaneously connected to the shared experience we're having, like, and feeling a lot of empathy for the common humanity and all of us dealing with this. And at the same time, in a very practical way, like, not wanting to be anywhere close to other human beings and feeling scared. Like,
yeah,
right.
And you're someone who I'm guessing, easily can tap into other people's emotions as the empath. And so being out like that, and I've noticed the same thing for me. I went out a couple days ago and it was my first time in any of the stores in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I did one visit the week earlier to like a local farmer's market outdoor produce stand, but that wasn't like a contained supermarket kind of thing. So it felt a little bit safer.
Yeah.
Perception, I don't know. But so when I went out a couple of days ago, I hit all the major stores and figured, okay, I'm out. This is my one day out for the next 2 weeks. I brought some food to my mom because she can't go out. And I came home and I was emotionally drained. Like, it was psychologically exhausting because there was that fear base of, I'm the same way. I will talk to strangers in line at the grocery store all the time. I love that. And
me too.
I partly want to connect more, but then I'm like, am I too close? Like the thoughts going through my mind, it's exhausting.
It is. And thinking, all the things that we're touching, and should I touch this? And how do I touch this? And I have some gloves on and I'm bringing food home. Do I need to, like, all this stuff that I usually walk through the grocery store, whether it's Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or Safeway or Costco, whatever, with my earbuds in, like, listening to a podcast or talking on the phone, like, multitasking and trying not to be a total jerk and bump into people. But for the most part, like, I actually love going to the grocery store. It's something, and Michelle loves that I love it because it's one of my favorite things to do. It's like a walking meditation for me.
I love it too. Oh my God, I totally relate.
But, and now it's like, again, it's become this completely different sport of things, if you will. And again, even as you and I are having this conversation, or I've been talking to a lot of people in a different regard of the challenge of working from home. Mm-hmm. I'm also, again, without doing the comparative suffering or challenge thing, I'm also trying to be mindful of the privileges of all of this. That, like, okay, I am grateful that we have enough so that we can go to the store and get what we need and come home and try not to go out again because it's uncomfortable. I am grateful that even with the challenge and the disruption and the potential diminishment of my business, at least in the short term, that I still have the ability to do something. I'm thinking about people who work at shopping malls and movie theaters and restaurants and places like that, who are probably already living hand to mouth. And now those places are closed indefinitely. And it's like, for you and I living here in the Bay Area, somewhere that's so expensive to live, like, how are people managing, trying to figure out how they're going to feed their family, literally, and keep them safe while they have to pay rent or mortgage to live here? And they don't, you can't work at the Gap for now or wherever you work when you're doing that. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, I think it's important to be mindful of our experience of it and the realness of it. And at the same time, to take a step back simultaneously, as we were talking about earlier, not to do the spiritual bypass, but to also try to have some perspective. And that's one thing, Joy, for me, that I'm realizing too, that if we can tap into the collective and the common humanity of this experience, that most people, even the people that we might sometimes consciously or unconsciously look to and think, oh, well, they have it, easier than me because fill in the blank, they have some status or some money or something. Like, again, why it relates back to death and to grief in a way to me is that no one's immune from that and nobody's bigger than that. And at the end of the day, as physical human beings walking around on this planet, like there's a finite amount of time that we have, and it does not matter how rich and famous you are. It does not matter all of the privileges you have. At the end of the time that we all have here in life, we all are going to end up in the same place. Yeah. And there's something both scary about that to me and also incredibly nourishing and nurturing when I tap into that, because it actually has me calm down and just realize, like, we're all going to kind of be okay no matter what happens in a spiritual sense, in a sort of eternal sense,
Well, and going deeper into the Buddhist practices is to even consider a death meditation.
Yep.
Which you mentioned in the beginning, but I've been on a retreat 3 times with Dan Millman.
I love Dan.
And my favorite teacher.
He's awesome.
My most life-changing experiences have been on retreat with Dan. Oh. And my second retreat with him was largely focused on a death meditation. Mm-hmm. And it's a really scary thing to embrace our own mortality and to practice complete non-attachment at the deepest level. And the purpose and the intention of a death meditation is to get you really present.
Yeah.
When you realize we are all fated towards the same thing. And like you said, we don't know our trajectory and our path specifically, but there's huge wisdom to come into that space of, like you said in the beginning, letting go of the little things.
Well, and
I think, letting go of, I think right now part of this non-attachment is to our privilege and to our freedoms.
Right.
And to speaking to what your daughter said of how much we'll be grateful for and what are we going to come out of this? And I know with my teenagers, I'm seeing my daughter's FaceTime versus Snapchat or text. Like, that to me is beautiful.
Right. Because they're wanting to connect real time.
Eye-to-eye contact. This is amazing.
It really is.
What feels small, I think, is really big. And so when we come into this idea of all of our safety and security, and I'm getting kind of deep, and I hope not disturbing to people, but really when we sit with it, all of our safety and security was all a perception anyway.
Totally. Well, and I love all of what you just said, and I love that you've spent some time with Dan Millman, who's fantastic and has been a friend and a mentor and someone. I read Way of the Peaceful Warrior, and I was like, that was one of those seminal books. There were 3 or 4 books in a row that I read right at a certain time in my life as I was coming out of my baseball career, and I said, I want to do that. I don't know how Dan Millman got to do that or how that works, but I want to do that. And but one of the things that I remember when my mom got sick, she passed away of cancer as well. She got diagnosed in March and actually died in June. So it was 3 months. Oh, wow. It was pretty fast. And in a lot of ways, there was a mercifulness to it. She got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And I was staying with her at her house. And it's the house that I grew up in Oakland. My parents bought that house when my mom was pregnant with me. It was the one and only house that we had my whole life growing up. And I go to spend some time with my mom, and I spent the night at the house with her. And I got up that morning and I was feeling a ton of emotion, and she was getting really sick, and she was kind of in denial about how sick she was. And we were all it was happening so fast. It was sort of this surreal experience. My mother was this really proud, really strong, really kind of like in charge. You can't tell her what to do kind of woman. And it was just like, whoa, we're trying to honor her experience of this. But so I go for a run in my neighborhood that I grew up in, and I'm literally running up and down the hills where, like, I used to ride my big wheel and my bike. And even though I still live here in the Bay Area, I don't live in Oakland anymore. Right. I didn't spend a ton of time in my neighborhood. And it was just, I was having all of these emotions and all of these flashbacks and all of it. And I started thinking about my mom, and I started having this thought in my head, Joy, as I'm running. I wonder what it's like for my mother, because we weren't having conversations quite like this yet. What's it like for her right now, knowing that she's going to die? Like, that must be really intense and really, like, I wonder what that's like. And I was feeling, and then all of a sudden I literally stopped, like physically stopped, because I had this moment. I went, wait a minute. I know I'm going to die. Like, I'm not actively dying at the moment, or I don't think I am, so I'm not thinking about it. And then it was like, I walked home from that moment on my run. It was about a block and a half. And the whole time I'm just like, if I lived my life more aware of my own death every day, like the death meditation you're talking about, I would live very differently. And I think that's true for all of us. And again, without being too hyperbolic about it, I do think that when we're dealing with something like this, what it brings up for us, it's just like when someone close to us gets sick or someone close to us dies, it brings up that reality that we like to be in denial about, that, oh, yeah, that's going to happen to me and everyone I love at some point. And instead of being terrified and freaked out about it and like paranoid, what if we turned towards that more? And what if we leaned into that more? And what if we breathed that in more genuinely, in a way, not to freak us out, but just to like open up
wake
to the
us
truth.
up.
Yeah, wake us up. That is true.
Well, and there's that great quote, I don't know about naming it exactly, but we're all going to die, but do we all truly live?
Right.
So to me, it comes down to awareness and presence and intention. These are the fundamentals of what I teach, because I so strongly believe in it. And which is why I didn't say so callously, like, this is the universe's way of saying, because it's time to be practicing mindfulness right now. It's time to like tune into yourself and tune into what's most important. And, I think there's going to be a lot of divorce that's going to come out of this.
I agree.
I think there's going to be a lot of uncomfortable shifts. But, or I always say and not but, and they're going to be the necessary ones.
Completely. Well, and it's going to call on all of us. I have a friend, my friend Robert Holden likes to say, he's a psychologist and friend of mine, author. He says, by the time most of us reach 30 years old, we usually have more than enough reasons to be miserable for the rest of our lives, right? Like, life is rough and painful stuff happens and we go through things. And basically what he's saying is we get to choose. There's a story I could tell you about my life that's a really sad story. That's a really, that I could get you and everyone to feel sorry for me. And, oh, that's really rough, Mike. And you had to deal with all of that. And make a bunch of reasons and excuses for why I'm angry and sad and miserable and stuck and all, right? And that all makes sense. And there's a whole other story that I can tell. And both are true to some degree, but it's really, what do we choose to focus on? And one of the things I've been saying to my team, I've been saying this to Michelle and to our girls, although the girls are at ages where they're now rolling their eyes at me when I say stuff like this, but I'm like, hey.
It's still getting in there underneath the eye roll, I believe.
I know. Thank you. I need that reminder, because we're still in the early days of 14 and 11. I'm still like, wait, you're not telling me I'm like the coolest guy ever? What? But it's like, imagine the story we're going to get to tell about this. What's the story we want to tell about how we experience this? And again, not from some ego place of like, we're the greatest, we're the best, but just like, let's dig deep in ourselves and lean on each other, so that the story that we tell on the other side of this is a story of gratitude, is a story of courage, is a story of resilience, is a story of, not the story of this happened to us, isn't that terrible? Because most of us, if you look back, I look back in my life, I'm sure the same is true in your life and most of the people who are listening to us. We've overcome a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Now, sometimes we've done it somewhat elegantly. Sometimes it's been really messy and painful and kind of a train wreck. But if we're still here, if you and I are still talking, people are still listening, like, we survived whatever the heck happened to the point.
You know what I always say? I always say to people, you have 100% success rate of getting through everything you never thought you could.
Exactly. That's such a great saying. I love that. I'm going to steal that if that's okay.
Steal it. Yeah.
Because that's so true, right? And we think, I can't handle this. I don't know, and we always have more that is required by the moment, even if we don't think we do.
Well, and my daughters give me the eye roll when they say something is hard, because I get accused of using too much mindfulness in my parenting. And I'm like, great, I'll pay for that in therapy when the years come, right? Like I'm okay with that. Yep. But the eye roll I get is when they say, I can't do this or I can't get through this. And I will respond by saying, and you already are.
Yeah.
But I can't, and you already are. You are already getting through what you think you can't do. Like, whether you think you can or you can't, you're already doing it.
It's true.
You may not like it. It may be hard. You may have resistance to it. It may bring up a lot of the, things we try to push away and ignore and deny, and you're still doing it.
So true. And
So
it's such a good reminder.
It's a great reminder. I could talk to you for hours. But how can people find you? You got this amazing book coming out.
Yes. And it's actually coming, I think it's coming out sooner than we think. Our publisher decided to push it up because of the title, and everyone seems to be saying we're all in this together. Again, the book's not about the coronavirus, but
it's not a spiritual bypass to, grab onto the silver lining. So if your book title is helping people right now, awesome, because these tools are necessary no matter what.
Yeah. So the best place that people can find out more about me and the book is actually, we set up a specific page on our site. It's at mike-robbins.com/together. And that's got info about the book. And then there's a few pieces of bonus material that people get when they order the book there.
Fantastic. And so mike-robbins.com, I'm sure they'll find all the other resources for you as well. So all that will be in the show notes. So as I've been saying to people, stay healthy, stay safe, and stay sane.
Yeah, thank you.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.